The snow had ceased, but it caked the ground deeply now, and the sleek ground car advanced through the deserted streets with lumbering effort. The murky gray light of incipient dawn was cold, not only in the poetical sense, but also in a very literal way. And even in the then turbulent state of the Foundation's politics, no one, whether actionist or pro-Hardin, found his spirits sufficiently ardent to begin street activity that early. Johann Lee did not like that, and his grumblings grew audible. "It's going to look bad, Hardin. They're going to say you sneaked away." "Let them say it if they wish. I've got to get to Anacreon, and I want to do it without trouble." "Now that's enough, Lee." Hardin leaned back into the cushioned seat and shivered slightly. It wasn't cold inside the well-heated car, but there was something frigid about a snow-covered world, even through glass, that annoyed him. He said reflectively, "Some day, when we get around to it, we ought to weather condition Terminus. It could be done." "I," replied Lee, "would like to see a few other things done first. For instance, what about weather conditioning Cermak? A nice dry cell fitted for 25 centigrade all year round would be just right." "Then I'd really need bodyguards," said Hardin, "and not just those two." He indicated two of Lee's bully boys sitting up front with the driver, hard eyes on the empty streets, ready hands at their atom blasts. "You evidently want to stir up civil war." "I do? There are other sticks in the fire, and it won't require much stirring, I can tell you." He counted off on blunt fingers. 1. Cermak raised hell yesterday in the city council and called for an impeachment. "He had a perfect right to do so," responded Hardin coolly. "Besides which, his motion was defeated 206 to 184. "Certainly. A majority of 22 when we had counted on 60 as a minimum. Don't deny it. You know you did." "It was close," admitted Hardin. "All right. And 2. After the vote, the 59 members of the Actionist Party reared upon their hind legs and stamped out of the council chambers." Hardin was silent, and Lee continued. "And 3. Before leaving, Cermak howled that you were a traitor, that you were going to Anacreon to collect your 30 pieces of silver, and that the chamber majority, in refusing to vote impeachment, had participated in the treason, and that the name of their party was not Actionist for nothing. What does that sound like? Trouble, I suppose. And now you're chasing off at daybreak like a criminal. You ought to face them, Hardin, and if you have to, declare martial law by space. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. Nuts. All right, we'll see. Now listen to me carefully, Lee. 30 years ago, the Time Vault opened, and on the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Foundation, there appeared a Harry Seldon recording to give us our first idea of what was really going on. I remember, Lee nodded reminiscently, with a half smile. It was the day we took over the government. That's right. It was the time of our first major crisis. This is our second, and 3 weeks from date will be the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Foundation. Does that strike you as in any way significant? You mean he's coming again? I'm not finished. Seldon never said anything about returning, you understand, but that's of a piece with his whole plan. He's always done his best to keep all foreknowledge from us, nor is there any way of telling whether the radium lock is set for further openings short of dismantling the vault, and is probably set to destroy itself if we were to try that. I've been there every anniversary since the first appearance, just on the chance. He's never shown up, but this is the first time since then that there's really been a crisis. Then he'll come. Maybe. I don't know. However, this is the point. At today's session of the council, just after you announce that I have left for Anacreon, you will further announce officially that on March 14th next, there will be another Harry Seldon recording, containing a message of the utmost importance regarding the recent successfully concluded crisis. That's very importantly, don't add anything more no matter how many questions are asked. Lee stared. Will they believe it? That doesn't matter. It will confuse them, which is all I want. Between wondering whether it is true and what I mean by it if it isn't, they'll decide to postpone action till after March 14th. I'll be back considerably before then. Lee looked uncertain. But that successfully concluded? That's bull. Highly confusing bull. Here's the airport. The waiting spaceship bulked somberly in the dimness. Hardin stamped through the snow toward it, and at the open airlock, turned about with outstretched hand. Goodbye, Lee. I hate to leave you in the frying pan like this, but there's not another I can trust. Now please keep out of the fire. Don't worry. The frying pan is hot enough. I'll follow orders. He stepped back, and the airlock closed. Salvor Hardin did not travel to the planet Anacreon, from which planet the kingdom derived its name immediately. It was only on the day before the coronation that he arrived, after having made flying visits to 8 of the larger stellar systems of the kingdom, stopping only long enough to confer with the local representatives of the Foundation. The trip left him with an oppressive realization of the vastness of the kingdom. It was a little splinter, an insignificant fly speck compared to the inconceivable reaches of the galactic empire of which it had once formed so distinguished a part, but to one whose habits of thought had been built around a single planet, and a sparsely settled one at that. Anacreon's size in area and population was staggering. Following closely the boundaries of the old prefect of Anacreon, it embraced 25 stellar systems, 6 of which included more than one habitable world. The population of 19 billion, though still far less than it had been in the Empire's heyday, was rising rapidly with the increasing scientific development fostered by the Foundation. And it was only now that Hardin had found himself floored by the magnitude of that task. Even in 30 years, only the capital world had been powered. The outer provinces still possessed immense stretches where atomic power had not yet been reintroduced. Even the progress that had been made might have been impossible had it not been for the still workable relics left over by the ebbing tide of empire. When Hardin did arrive at the capital world, it was to find all normal business at an absolute standstill. In the outer provinces, there had been and still were celebrations. But here on the planet Anacreon, not a person but took feverish part in the hectic religious pageantry that heralded the coming of age of their god-king Leopold. Hardin had been able to snatch only half an hour from a haggard and harried Verisov before his ambassador was forced to rush off to supervise still another temple festival. But the half hour was a most profitable one, and Hardin prepared himself for the night's fireworks, well satisfied. In all, he acted as an observer, for he had no stomach for the religious tasks he would undoubtedly have had to undertake if his identity became known. So when the palace's ballroom filled itself with a glittering horde of the kingdom's very highest and most exalted nobility, he found himself hugging the wall, little noticed or totally ignored. He had been introduced to Leopold as one of a long line of introducees, and from a safe distance, for the king stood apart in lonely and impressive grandeur, surrounded by his deadly blaze of radioactive aura. And in less than an hour, this same king would take his seat upon the massive throne of rhodium iridium alloy with jewel-set gold chasings, and then, throne and all, would rise majestically into the air, skim the ground slowly, to hover before the great window from which the great crowds of common folk could see their king and shout themselves into near apoplexy. The throne would not have been so massive, of course, if it had not had an atomic motor built into it. It was past 11. Hardin fidgeted and stood on his toes to better his view. He resisted an impulse to stand on a chair, and then he saw Weenus threading through the crowd toward him, and he relaxed. Weenus' progress was slow. At almost every step he had to pass a kindly sentence with some revered noble whose grandfather had helped Leopold's grandfather brigandize the kingdom and had received a dukedom therefore. And then he disentangled himself from the last uniformed peer and reached Hardin. His smile crooked itself into a smirk, and his black eyes peered from under grizzled brows with glints of satisfaction in them. "My dear Hardin," he said in a low voice, "you must expect to be bored when you refuse to announce your identity." "I am not bored, Your Highness. This is all extremely interesting. We have no comparable spectacles on Terminus, you know." "No doubt. But would you care to step into my private chambers where we can speak at greater length and with considerably more privacy?" "Certainly." With arms linked, the two ascended the staircase, and more than one dowager duchess raised her lorgnette in surprise and wonder at the identity of this insignificantly dressed and uninteresting-looking stranger on whom such signal honor was being conferred by the Prince Regent. In Weenus' chambers, Hardin relaxed in perfect comfort and accepted with a murmur of gratitude the glass of liquor that had been poured out by the regent's own hand. "Locris wine, Hardin," said Weenus, "from the royal cellars. The real thing, 2 centuries in age. It was laid down 10 years before the Zeonian Rebellion." "A really royal drink," agreed Hardin politely. "To Leopold the First, King of Anacreon." They drank, and Weenus added blandly, at the pause, "and soon to be Emperor of the Periphery, and further, who knows? The galaxy may some day be reunited." "Undoubtedly. By Anacreon?" "Why not? With the help of the Foundation, our scientific superiority over the rest of the Periphery would be undisputable." Hardin set his empty glass down and said, "Well, yes, except that, of course, the Foundation is bound to help any nation that requests scientific aid of it. Due to the high idealism of our government and the great moral purpose of our founder, Harry Seldon, we are unable to play favorites. That can't be helped, Your Highness." Weenus' smile broadened. "The galactic spirit, to use the popular cant, helps those who helps themselves. I quite understand that. Left to itself, the Foundation would never cooperate." "I wouldn't say that. We repaired the Imperial cruiser for you, though my Board of Navigation wished it for themselves for research purposes." The Regent repeated the last words ironically. "Research purposes. Yes, yet you would not have repaired it had I not threatened war." Hardin made a deprecatory gesture. "I don't know." "I do. And that threat always stood." "And still stands now?" "Now it is rather too late to speak of threats." Weenus had cast a rapid glance at the clock on his desk. "Look here, Hardin. You were on Anacreon once before. You were young then. We were both young. But even then, we had entirely different ways of looking at things. You're what they call a man of peace, aren't you? I suppose I am. At least, I consider violence an uneconomical way of attaining an end. There are always better substitutes, though they may sometimes be a little less direct. Yes, I've heard of your famous remark, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. And yet, the regent scratched one ear gently in affected abstraction. I wouldn't call myself exactly incompetent. Hardin nodded politely and said nothing. And in spite of that, Weenus continued, I have always believed in direct action. I have believed in carving a straight path to my objective and following that path. I have accomplished much that way, and fully expect to accomplish still more. I know, interrupted Hardin. I believe you are carving a path such as you describe for yourself and your children that leads directly to the throne. Considering the late unfortunate death of the king's father, your elder brother, and the king's own precarious state of health. He is in a precarious state of health, is he not? Weenus frowned at the shot, and his voice grew harder. You might find it advisable, Hardin, to avoid certain subjects. You may consider yourself privileged as mayor of Terminus to make, injudicious remarks, but if you do, please disabuse yourself of the notion. I am not one to be frightened at words. It has been my philosophy of life that difficulties vanish when faced boldly, and I have never turned my back upon one yet. I don't doubt that. What particular difficulty are you refusing to turn your back upon at the present moment? The difficulty, Hardin, of persuading the Foundation to cooperate. Your policy of peace, you see, has led you into making several very serious mistakes, simply because you understand the boldness of your adversary. Not everyone is as afraid of direct action as you are. For instance, suggested Hardin. For instance, you came to Anacreon alone and accompanied me to my chambers alone. Hardin looked about him. And what is wrong with that? Nothing, said the regent, except that outside this room are 5 police guards, well armed and ready to shoot. I don't think you can leave, Hardin. The mayor's eyebrows lifted. I have no immediate desire to leave. Do you then fear me so much? I don't fear you at all. But this may serve to impress you with my determination. Shall we call it a gesture? Call it what you please, said Hardin indifferently. I shall not discommode myself over the incident, whatever you choose to call it. I'm sure that attitude will change with time, but you have made another error, Hardin, a more serious one. It seems that the planet Terminus is almost wholly undefended. Naturally. What have we to fear? We threaten no one's interest and serve all alike. And while remaining helpless, Weenus went on, you kindly helped us to arm ourselves, aiding us particularly in the development of a navy of our own, a great navy. In fact, a navy which, since your donation of the Imperial cruiser, is quite irresistible. Your Highness, you're wasting time. Hardin made as if to rise from his seat. If you mean to declare war, and are informing me of the fact, you will allow me to communicate with my government at once. Sit down, Hardin. I am not declaring war, and you are not communicating with your government at all. When the war is fought, not declared, Hardin, fought, the Foundation will be informed of it in due time by the atom blasts of the Anacreonian Navy under the lead of my own son upon the flagship Weenus, once a cruiser of the Imperial Navy. Hardin frowned. When will all this happen? If you're really interested, the ships of the fleet left Anacreon exactly 50 minutes ago at 11, and the first shot will be fired as soon as they sight Terminus, which should be at noon tomorrow. You may consider yourself a prisoner of war. That is exactly what I do consider myself, Your Highness, said Hardin, still frowning, but I'm disappointed. Weenus chuckled contemptuously. Is that all? Yes, I had thought that the moment of coronation, midnight, you know, would be the logical time to set the fleet in motion. Evidently, you wanted to start the war while you were still regent. It would have been more dramatic the other way. The regent stared. What in space are you talking about? Don't you understand, said Hardin softly. I had set my counter-stroke for midnight. Weenus started from his chair. You are not bluffing me. There is no counter-stroke. If you are counting on the support of the other kingdoms, forget it. Their navies, combined, are no match for ours. I know that. I don't intend firing a shot. It is simply that the word went out a week ago that at midnight tonight the planet Anacreon goes under the interdict. The interdict? Yes, if you don't understand, I might explain that every priest in Anacreon is going on strike unless I countermand the order. But I can't while I'm being held incommunicado, nor do I wish to even if I weren't. He leaned forward and added with sudden animation, Do you realize, Your Highness, that an attack on the Foundation is nothing short of sacrilege of the highest order? Weenus was groping visibly for self-control. Give me none of that, Hardin. Save it for the mob. My dear Weenus, whoever do you think I am saving it for? I imagine that for the last half hour, every temple on Anacreon has been the center of a mob listening to a priest exhorting them upon that very subject. There's not a man or woman on Anacreon that doesn't know that their government has launched a vicious, unprovoked attack upon the center of their religion. But it lacks only 4 minutes of midnight now. You'd better go down to the ballroom to watch events. I'll be safe here with 5 guards outside the door. He leaned back in his chair, helped himself to another glass of Locris wine, and gazed at the ceiling with perfect indifference. Weenus blistered the air with a muffled oath and rushed out of the room. A hush had fallen over the elite in the ballroom, as a broad path was cleared for the throne. Leopold sat on it now, hands solidly on its arms, head high, face frozen. The huge chandeliers had dimmed, and then the diffused multicolored light from the tiny atomo bulbs that bespangled the vaulted ceiling, the royal aura, shone out bravely, lifting high above his head to form a blazing coronet. Weenus paused on the stairway. No one saw him. All eyes were on the throne. He clenched his fists and remained where he was. Hardin would not bluff him into silly action. And then the throne stirred. Noiselessly, it lifted upward and drifted. Off the dais, slowly down the steps, and then horizontally. 6 inches off the floor, it worked itself toward the huge open window. At the sound of the deep-toned bell that signified midnight, it stopped before the window, and the king's aura died. For a frozen split second, the king did not move. Face twisted in surprise, without an aura, merely human. And then the throne wobbled and fell the 6 inches to the floor with a crashing thump, just as every light in the palace went out. Through the shrieking din and confusion, Weenus' bull voice sounded, Get the flares! Get the flares! He buffeted right and left through the crowd and forced his way to the door. From without, palace guards had streamed into the darkness. Somehow, the flares were brought back to the ballroom. Flares that were to have been used in the gigantic torchlight procession through the streets of the city after the coronation. Back to the ballroom, guardsmen swarmed with torches, blue, green, and red, where the strange light lit up frightened, confused faces. There is no harm done, shouted Weenus. Keep your places. Power will return in a moment. He turned to the captain of the guard, who stood stiffly at attention. What is it, Captain? Your Highness, was the instant response. The palace is surrounded by the people of the city. What do they want? Snarled Weenus. A priest is at the head. He has been identified as High Priest Polyverisov. He demands the immediate release of Mayor Salvor Hardin and cessation of the war against the Foundation. The report was made in the expressionless tones of an officer, but his eyes shifted uneasily. Venus cried, "If any of the rabble attempt to pass the palace gates, blast them out of existence. For the moment, nothing more. Let them howl. There will be an accounting tomorrow." The torches had been distributed now, and the ballroom was again alight. Venus rushed to the throne, still standing by the window, and dragged the stricken, wax-faced Leopold to his feet. "Come with me." He cast one look out of the window. The city was pitch black. From below, there were the hoarse, confused cries of the mob. Only toward the right, where the Argolid temple stood, was there illumination. He swore angrily and dragged the king away. Venus burst into his chambers, the 5 guardsmen at his heels. Leopold followed, wide-eyed, scared, speechless. "Hardin," said Venus huskily, "you are playing with forces too great for you." The mayor ignored the speaker. In the pearly light of the pocket, a Tomo bulb at his side, he remained quietly seated, a slightly ironic smile on his face. "Good morning, Your Majesty," he said to Leopold. "I congratulate you on your coronation." "Hardin," cried Venus again, "order your priests back to their jobs." Hardin looked up coolly. "Order them yourself, Venus, and see who's playing with forces too great for whom. Right now, there is not a wheel turning in Anacreon. There's not a light burning except in the temples. There's not a drop of water running except in the temples. On the wintry half of the planet, there's not a calorie of heat except in the temples. The hospitals are taking in no more patients. The power plants have shut down. All ships are grounded. If you don't like it, Venus, you can order the priests back to their jobs. I don't wish to. By space, Hardin, I will. If it's to be a showdown, so be it. We'll see if your priests can withstand the army. Tonight, every temple on the planet will be put under army supervision." "Very good. But how are you going to give the orders? Every line of communication on the planet is shut down. You'll find that radio won't work, and the televisors won't work, and the ultrawave won't work. In fact, the only communicator of the planet that will work, outside of the temples, of course, is the televisor right here in this room, and I fitted it only for reception." Venus struggled vainly for breath, and Hardin continued, "If you wish, you can order your army into the Argolid temple just outside the palace, and then use the ultrawave sets there to contact other portions of the planet. But if you do that, I'm afraid the army contingent will be cut to pieces by the mob, and then what will protect your palace, Venus, and your lives, Venus?" Venus said thickly, "We can hold out, devil. We'll last the day. Let the mob howl, and let the power die, but we'll hold out. And when the news comes back that the Foundation has been taken, your precious mob will find upon what vacuum their religion has been built, and they'll desert your priests and turn against them. I give you until noon tomorrow, Hardin, because you can stop the power on Anacreon, but you can't stop my fleet." His voice croaked exultantly. "They're on their way, Hardin, with the great cruiser you yourself ordered repaired at the head." Hardin replied lightly, "Yes, the cruiser I myself ordered repaired, but in my own way. Tell me, Venus, have you ever heard of an ultrawave relay?" "No, I see you haven't." "Well, in about 2 minutes you'll find out what one can do." The televisor flashed to life as he spoke, and he amended, "No, in 2 seconds. Sit down, Venus, and listen." Theo Apparat was one of the very highest-ranking priests of Anacreon. From the standpoint of precedence alone, he deserved his appointment as head priest, attendant upon the flagship Venus. But it was not only rank or precedence. He knew the ship. He had worked directly under the holy men from the Foundation itself in repairing the ship. He had gone over the motors under their orders. He had rewired the visors, revamped the communication system, replated the punctured hole, reinforced the beams. He had even been permitted to help while the wise men of the Foundation had installed a device so holy it had never been placed in any previous ship, but had been reserved only for this magnificent colossus of a vessel, the ultra-wave relay. It was no wonder that he felt heartsick over the purposes to which the glorious ship was perverted. He had never wanted to believe what Verisov had told him, that the ship was to be used for appalling wickedness, that its guns were to be turned on the great Foundation, turned on that Foundation where he had been trained as a youth, from which all blessedness was derived. Yet he could not doubt now, after what the Admiral had told him. How could the king, divinely blessed, allow this abominable act? Or was it the king? Was it not, perhaps, an action of the accursed Regent Venus, without the knowledge of the king at all? And it was the son of this same Venus that was the admiral who 5 minutes before had told him, "Attend to your souls and your blessings, priest. I will attend to my ship." Apparat smiled crookedly. He would attend to his souls and his blessings, and also to his cursings, and Prince Levkin would wind soon enough. He had entered the general communications room now. His acolyte preceded him, and the 2 officers in charge made no move to interfere. The head priest attendant had the right of free entry anywhere on the ship. "Close the door," Apparat ordered, and looked at the chronometer. It lacked 5 minutes of 12. He had timed it well. With quick practiced motions, he moved the little levers that opened all communications, so that every part of the 2-mile-long ship was within reach of his voice and his image. "Soldiers of the Royal Flagship Venus, attend. It is your priest attendant that speaks." The sound of his voice reverberated, he knew, from the stern atom blast in the extreme rear to the navigation tables in the prow. "Your ship," he cried, "is engaged in sacrilege. Without your knowledge, it is performing such an act as will doom the soul of every man among you to the eternal frigidity of space. Listen, it is the intention of your commander to take this ship to the Foundation, and there to bombard that source of all blessings into submission to his sinful will. And since that is his intention, I, in the name of the Galactic Spirit, remove him from his command. For there is no command where the blessing of the Galactic Spirit has been withdrawn. The Divine King himself may not maintain his kingship without the consent of the Spirit." His voice took on a deeper tone, while the acolyte listened with veneration and the 2 soldiers with mounting fear. "And because this ship is upon such a devil's errand, the blessing of the Spirit is removed from it as well." He lifted his arm solemnly, and before 1,000 televisors throughout the ship, soldiers cowered as the stately image of their priest attendant spoke. "In the name of the Galactic Spirit and of his prophet, Harry Seldon, and of his interpreters, the holy men of the Foundation, I curse this ship. Let the televisors of this ship, which are its eyes, become blind. Let its grapples, which are its arms, be paralyzed. Let the atom blasts, which are its fists, lose their function. Let the motors, which are its heart, cease to beat. Let the communications, which are its voice, become dumb. Let its ventilations, which are its breath, fade. Let its lights, which are its soul, shrivel into nothing. In the name of the Galactic Spirit, I so curse this ship." And with his last word, at the stroke of midnight, a hand, light years distant in the Argolid Temple, opened an ultra-wave relay, which at the instantaneous speed of the ultra-wave, opened another on the flagship Venus. And the ship died. For it is the chief characteristic of the religion of science that it works, and that such curses as that of Apparat's are really deadly. Apparat saw the darkness close down on the ship, and heard the sudden ceasing of the soft, distant purring of the hyperatomic motors. He exulted, and from the pocket of his long robe withdrew a self-powered atomo bulb that filled the room with pearly light. He looked down at the 2 soldiers who, brave men though they undoubtedly were, writhed on their knees in the last extremity of mortal terror. Save our souls, your reverence. We are poor men, ignorant of the crimes of our leaders, one whimpered. Follow, said Apparat sternly. Your soul is not yet lost. The ship was a turmoil of darkness in which fear was so thick and palpable it was all but a miasmic smell. Soldiers crowded close wherever Apparat and his circle of light passed, striving to touch the hem of his robe, pleading for the tiniest scrap of mercy, and always his answer was, "Follow me!" He found Prince Lefkin groping his way through the officers' quarters, cursing loudly for lights. The admiral stared at the priest-attendant with hating eyes. There you are! Lefkin inherited his blue eyes from his mother. But there was that about the hook in his nose and the squint in his eye that marked him as the son of Venus. What is the meaning of your treasonable actions? Return the power to the ship. I am commander here. No longer, said Apparat somberly. Lefkin looked about wildly. Seize that man, arrest him, or by space I will send every man within reach of my voice out the airlock in the nude. He paused and then shrieked. It is your admiral that orders. Arrest him. Then, as he lost his head entirely, are you allowing yourselves to be fooled by this mountebank, this harlequin? Do you cringe before a religion compounded of clouds and moonbeams? This man is an impostor, and the galactic spirit he speaks of a fraud, of the imagination devised to— Apparat interrupted furiously. Seize the blasphemer! You listen to him at the peril of your souls! And promptly the noble admiral went down under the clutching hands of a score of soldiers. Take him with you and follow me. Apparat turned, and with Lefkin dragged along after him, and the corridors behind black with soldiery, he returned to the communications room. There he ordered the ex-commander before the one televisor that worked. Order the rest of the fleet to cease course and to prepare for the return to Anacreon. The disheveled Lefkin, bleeding, beaten, and half-stunned, did so. And now, continued Apparat grimly, we are in contact with Anacreon on the ultra-wave beam. Speak as I order you. Lefkin made a gesture of negation, and the mob in the room and the others crowding the corridor beyond growled fearfully. Speak, said Apparat. Begin. The Anacreonian Navy. Lefkin began. There was absolute silence in Venus chambers when the image of Prince Lefkin appeared at the televisor. There had been one startled gasp from the regent at the haggard face and shredded uniform of his son, and then he collapsed into a chair, face contorted with surprise and apprehension. Hardin listened stolidly, hands clasped lightly in his lap, while the just-crowned King Leopold sat shriveled in the most shadowy corner, biting spasmodically at his gold-braided sleeve. Even the soldiers had lost the emotionless stare that is the prerogative of the military, and from where they lined up against the door, atom blasts ready, peered furtively at the figure upon the televisor. Lefkin spoke reluctantly, with a tired voice that paused at intervals as though he were being prompted, and not gently. The Anacreonian Navy, aware of the nature of its mission, and refusing to be a party to abominable sacrilege, is returning to Anacreon with the following ultimatum issued to those blaspheming sinners who would dare to use profane force against the foundation, source of all blessings, and against the galactic spirit. Cease at once all war against the true faith, and guarantee in a manner suiting us of the Navy, as represented by our priest-attendant Theo Apparat, that such war will never in the future be resumed, and that— here a long pause, and then continuing— and that the one-time Prince Regent Venus be imprisoned, and tried before an ecclesiastical court for his crimes. Otherwise, the Royal Navy, upon returning to Anacreon, will blast the palace to the ground and take whatever other measures are necessary to destroy the nest of sinners and the den of destroyers of men's souls that now prevail. The voice ended with a half sob, and the screen went blank. Hardin's fingers passed rapidly over the atomo bulb, and its light faded until in the dimness, the hitherto regent, the king, and the soldiers were hazy-edged shadows, and for the first time it could be seen that an aura encompassed Hardin. It was not the blazing light that was the prerogative of kings, but one less spectacular, less impressive, and yet one more effective in its own way, and more useful. Hardin's voice was softly ironic as he addressed the same Venus who had 1 hour earlier declared him a prisoner of war, and Terminus on the point of destruction, and who now was a huddled shadow, broken and silent. There is an old fable, said Hardin, as old perhaps as humanity, for the oldest records containing it are merely copies of other records still older that might interest you. It runs as follows. A horse having a wolf as powerful and dangerous enemy lived in constant fear of his life. Being driven to desperation, it occurred to him to seek a strong ally, whereupon he approached a man and offered an alliance, pointing out that the wolf was likewise an enemy of the man. The man accepted the partnership at once, and offered to kill the wolf immediately, if his new partner would only cooperate by placing his greater speed at the man's disposal. The horse was willing, and allowed the man to place bridle and saddle upon him. The man mounted, hunted down the wolf, and killed him. The horse, joyful and relieved, thanked the man and said, "Now that our enemy is dead, remove your bridle and saddle and restore my freedom." Whereupon the man laughed loudly and replied, "The hell you say? Giddy up, Dobbin," and applied the spurs with a will. Silence still. The shadow that was Venus did not stir. Hardin continued quietly. You see the analogy, I hope. In their anxiety to cement forever total domination over their own people, the kings of the four kingdoms accepted the religion of science that made them divine. And that same religion of science was their bridle and saddle, for it placed the lifeblood of atomic power in the hands of the priesthood, who took their orders from us, be it noted, and not from you. You killed the wolf, but could not get rid of them. Venus sprang to his feet, and in the shadows his eyes were maddened hollows. His voice was thick, incoherent. "And yet I'll get you. You won't escape. You'll rot. Let them blow us up. Let them blow everything up. You'll rot. I'll get you." "Soldiers," he thundered hysterically, "shoot me down that devil. Blast him, blast him." Hardin turned about in his chair to face the soldiers and smiled. One aimed his atom blast and then lowered it. The others never budged. Salvor Hardin, mayor of Terminus, surrounded by that soft aura, smiling so confidently, and before whom all the power of Anacreon had crumbled to powder, was too much for them, despite the orders of the shrieking maniac just beyond. Venus screamed a curse and staggered to the nearest soldier. Wildly, he wrested the atom blast from the man's hand, aimed it at Hardin, who didn't stir, shoved the lever, and held it contacted. The pale, continuous beam impinged upon the force field that surrounded the mayor of Terminus and was sucked harmlessly to neutralization. Venus pressed harder and laughed tearingly. Hardin still smiled, and his force field aura scarcely brightened as it absorbed the energies of the atom blast. From his corner, Leopold covered his eyes and moaned, and with a yell of despair, Venus changed his aim and shot again, and toppled to the floor with his head blown into nothingness. Hardin winced at the sight and muttered, "A man of direct action to the end. The last refuge." The time vault was filled far beyond the available seating capacity, and men lined the back of the room 3 deep. Salvor Hardin compared this large company with the few men attending the first appearance of Harry Seldon 30 years earlier. There had only been 6 then, the 5 old encyclopedists, all dead now, and himself, the young figurehead of a mayor. It had been on that day that he, with Johann Lee's assistance, had removed the figurehead stigma from his office. It was quite different now, different in every respect. Every man of the city council was awaiting Seldon's appearance. He himself was still mayor, but all-powerful now, and since the utter rout of Anacreon, all-popular. When he had returned from Anacreon with the news of the death of Venus and the new treaty signed with the trembling Leopold, he was greeted with a voice of confidence of shrieking unanimity. When this was followed in rapid order by similar treaties signed with each of the other 3 kingdoms, treaties that gave the Foundation powers such as would forever prevent any attempts at attacks similar to that of Anacreon's, torchlight processions had been held in every city street of Terminus. Not even Harry Seldon's name had been more loudly cheered. Hardin's lips twitched. Such popularity had been his after the first crisis also. Across the room, Seth Cermak and Louis Bort were engaged in animated discussion, and recent events seemed to have put them out not at all. They enjoyed in the vote of confidence, made speeches in which they publicly admitted that they had been in the wrong, apologized handsomely for the use of certain phrases in earlier debates, excused themselves delicately by declaring they had merely followed the dictates of their judgment and their conscience, and immediately launched a new actionist campaign. Johann Lee touched Hardin's sleeve and pointed significantly to his watch. Hardin looked up. "Hello there, Lee. Are you still sour? What's wrong now?" "He's due in 5 minutes, isn't he?" "I presume so. He appeared at noon last time." "What if he doesn't?" "Are you going to wear me down with your worries all your life? If he doesn't, he won't." Lee frowned and shook his head slowly. "If this thing flops, we're in another mess. Without Seldon's backing for what we've done, Cermak will be free to start all over. He wants outright annexation of the 4 kingdoms and immediate expansion of the Foundation, by force if necessary. He's begun his campaign already. I know, a fire eater must eat fire even if he has to kindle it himself. And you, Lee, have got to worry even if you must kill yourself to invent something to worry about." Lee would have answered, but he lost his breath at just that moment, as the lights yellowed and went dim. He raised his arm to point to the glass cubicle that dominated half the room, and then collapsed into a chair with a windy sigh. Hardin himself straightened at the sight of the figure that now filled the cubicle, a figure in a wheelchair. He alone of all those present could remember the day, decades ago, when that figure had appeared first. He had been young then, and the figure old. Since then, the figure had not aged a day, but he himself had in turn grown old. The figure stared straight ahead, hands fingering a book in its lap. It said, "I am Harry Seldon." The voice was old and soft. There was a breathless silence in the room, and Harry Seldon continued conversationally. "This is the 2nd time I've been here. Of course, I don't know if any of you were here the first time. In fact, I have no way of telling, by sense perception, that there is anyone here at all. But that doesn't matter. If the 2nd crisis has been overcome safely, you are bound to be here. There is no way out. If you are not here, then the 2nd crisis has been too much for you." He smiled engagingly. "I doubt that, however, for my figures show a 98.4% probability there is to be no significant deviation from the plan in the first 80 years. According to our calculations, you have now reached domination of the barbarian kingdoms immediately surrounding the Foundation. Just as in the first crisis, you held them off by the use of the balance of power, so in the second you gained majesty by use of the spiritual power, as against the temporal. However, I might warn you here against overconfidence. It is not my way to grant you any foreknowledge in these recordings, but it would be safe to indicate that what you have now achieved is merely a new balance, though one in which your position is considerably better. The spiritual power, while sufficient to ward off attacks of the temporal, is not sufficient to attack in turn. Because of the invariable growth of the counteracting force known as regionalism or nationalism, the spiritual power cannot prevail. I am telling you nothing new, I'm sure. You must pardon me, by the way, for speaking to you in this vague way. The terms I use are at best mere approximations, but none of you is qualified to understand the true symbology of psychohistory, and so I must do the best I can. In this case, the foundation is only at the start of the path that leads to new empire. The neighboring kingdoms, in manpower and resources, are still overwhelmingly powerful as compared to yourselves. Outside them lies the vast tangled jungle of barbarism that extends around the entire breadth of the galaxy. Within that rim there is still what is left of the galactic empire, and that, weakened and decaying though it is still incomparably mighty. At this point Harry Seldon lifted his book and opened it. His face grew solemn. And never forget there was another foundation established 80 years ago. A foundation at the other end of the galaxy, at Star's End. They will always be there for consideration. Gentlemen, 920 years of the plan stretch ahead of you. The problem is yours. Go to it. He dropped his eyes to his book and flicked out of existence, while the lights brightened to fullness. In the babble that followed, Lee leaned over to Hardin's ear. He didn't say when he'd be back. Hardin replied, I know, but I trust that he won't return until you and I are safely and cozily dead.